Allison McDowell here, reporting in from Hot Springs, Arkansas. And I've been putting off having this conversation for some time. I kept meaning to do it, and then I wouldn't get around to it, and then I would plan to do it, and so I would back off. And so I decided just to sort of riff it and not have notes or have it be overly structured, because I guess I want it to sort of come from the heart and not be overly scripted. And so we're at almost a year since I bought my house here in Arkansas. I think next week it will be 1 year. And I feel like it's been a really great experience. It was a really good choice. And I'm here. There's wonderful community here, and I'm very happy. Lots of amazing nature. So it's all good on that front. And it's very hot here. My garden is in the full summer mode now, with tomatoes and eggplants and long beans, and my cucumbers are kind of on the way out, and I'm still waiting for the summer squash to kick in. And I'm doing a lot of watering. I don't have an irrigation system or really even hoses, so I'm just carrying around 2-gallon watering cans and communing with plants and seeing who likes it in the heat. So yeah, and my crepe myrtle hedge, which was all diseased, is like shooting out like hot pink flowers out the top. So it's doing well, almost to the point of having some of the little trunks flop over because they're overly exuberant with their hot pink hairdos. And my figs are just about to be ready, probably in the next couple weeks, and that's something to look forward to. It's grown a ton. I pruned it back by like 30% over the winter, and it's like huge now. So yeah, so things are all good. And I just wanted to take a few minutes sort of to share where I am presently. And I want to sort of frame it around, there used to be a song that was like a summer camp song. It was like a participatory, where you get everyone around in a circle and you do it. And this song was like going on a bear hunt. And not that I hunt bear, but the refrain would be, as you go on this bear hunt, that you would encounter various obstacles, like a swamp or tall grass or a mountain or something. And the refrain would be, you can't go over it, you can't go under it, you can't go around it, so you have to go through it. And then you'd sort of go through the motions of, wading through the swamp or going through the grass or climbing the mountain, and you would go through it. And I feel like where we're at now, and again, I'm largely checked out of most of the feed and the geopolitics, and I know there are many, claims of the end of the world being imminent and totalitarianism and all of these things. They're not really touching on my life personally, and I think there may be some people out there who imagine that it's very selfish of me not to engage in all of these horror stories and to have like a nice quiet life. That's somehow highly offensive. And I suppose to those people who feel that way, there's nothing to be done about that. That's just how you're going to feel about me. And if you need me to be in your life to provide that service for you, then okay, I'll do that. But being unplugged from these systems actually gives you a lot of breathing room. And so I'm here, I'm still thinking, I'm still doing research. You'll notice I have some clips that I put up on my channel that I find interesting. I don't know how many, if they're of interest to other people, but I find them highly compelling. So it's not like I've stopped doing research. I'm just doing it in a slightly quieter, more personal way. And so the going through it, I feel like at this point, it's pretty clear that our shift into a next version of the internet, which is spatial computing, which is run on Web3 tokenization, right, and digital identity and the internet of everything, at all of these different scales, like global scales towards the noosphere, that's all happening. It's not happening, and despite my efforts over the past decade to try to sort of direct consciousness towards certain stories that I would like to have, those weren't really happening. And I do actually have a great playlist by this young guy, David Rugg, who's talking about a protocol layer for digital campfires and storytellings where you could kind of like send up a light beacon sigil and be like, these are the stories I'd like to talk about here. I have a digital wallet with all of these stories. Do any of them overlap with the stories you want to talk about? And here are the concepts behind the stories that are what I'm, I guess it's like in a Tinder for synergetic conversations or something like that. And actually I was like, yes, please, because I painted myself into a corner where there's not that many people who are interested in having the same kind of conversations I'm interested in having. But yeah, so it's all happening. And so then what, right? Then we have a choice. I guess we can either choose to continually be angry about it and scared and frustrated, and then we're exerting that sort of energy into the system. Or we can figure out how to know it, maybe how to know it even better than the people who are running it know it, because they often don't know it very well or don't know it very comprehensively. And then figure out a way through it that we can navigate it with our agency and integrity intact. And so that's the challenge, is how do we acknowledge it and engage with it in ways that maintain our own integrity. And I think it can be done. And the other thing that I've come across is that Steffer shared with me a transcript of an interview that was done with Bernard Lietaer, I think in 2007 or 2008. And if you're not familiar, Lietaer, he was the economist who was in charge of sort of implementing the transition to the euro. And he was also a major promoter of parallel currencies and complementary currencies. And he mentored a woman named Galila Benartzi, who sort of got the momentum behind blockchain currencies, and it's called Bancor, like a liquid token exchange. And so in this interview, Lietaer confirmed something. Sorry about that. He confirmed something that I had been feeling for quite some time. And it was that his background was in esoteric energy work and sacred geometry. And so that's pretty significant when the person who oversees the rollout of an entire regional economy system, as well as a parallel currency system, is essentially saying it's grounded in esoteric energy work. But at the same time, it's very consistent with what we've been finding in terms of looking at money as currency, information physics, and the current of information. And then also down to the scale of our bodies, the conversations that we were having with Leo about fascia and us as liquid crystals and resonators. And, even when you look at Ethereum, right, ether. And so my feeling is sort of, I've arrived at this, and this is not saying I'll stay here forever, but my current framework is that these Web3 technologies are actually sort of a new modern costume, a new story placed on very old practices around how energy flows through the cosmos, both here in our 3D perceived reality, as well as in other informational dimensions that most people don't have regular access to, unless you have talents in that regard. And actually, there's a lot of people in Hot Springs that do have talents in that area, just not me, but I can respect that is a thing. And, that links into a lot of the research around parapsychology and psi. And so if you imagine that the currency is interdimensional and working with chi and prana, and you consider that within the background context of this new cosmic age, an age of Aquarius, which is the water bearer, which is flow. The story, the story I'm making up to live in right now is that new archetypal structure that is unfolding is opening up invitations to have engagement with the field, the divine field, however we understand that. And there's a lot of different stories of what that looks like. But not just shamans or high-level, practitioners of certain, levels of energy work, but regular people. And that is part of a push towards collective, embodied, distributed intelligence. And so the token transfers, the Web3 blockchain, is about complexity, networking, scaling these networks, and having these networks scale not only in our perceived 3D reality, but in other informational spaces. And, you can look back to, Melanie Swan's papers about blockchaining people and using their unused brainwave cycles while they sleep in terms of imagining where your consciousness goes when it's no longer here in this grounded reality and into other spaces, and then capturing those frequencies as information and using that. And so to me, it feels very much like it is opening up a conversation among individuals with the field, among collectives, which would be holons within the field. But those engagements, and this is how I view it, really can only happen if you have a coherence, like a heart coherence, and if you're grounded in a good way. Preferably, grounded in a space of love and the heart field and the torus, and that resonance is what will open up the conversation to the beyond, to the divine, to God, to the fractal recursive quantum reality area. But you actually have to be in a good way to get there, or it's going to be too much noise and static, and that connection is not going to be made. And so I know that there's a lot of conversations out there now around sort of end times, end of the world, global fascism, totalitarianism, and that's a certain story. And I would say that is a story that tends to make people lose their coherence, right? Be in spaces that are anxious and fearful. And my gut intuition is that when you're in that place of a low vibrational frequency, you are not able to access that beyond space very well. And so, and I'm open to being incorrect about this, but I would just posit as an alternative option, an alternative story option to be considered, is that if in this age, the goal is actually to create a globally networked consciousness that is engaging in a co-creative capacity with the quantum field in terms of what reality looks like here in this place that we inhabit, that logically what would follow from that is a world where people are okay, right? That people are living in stories that give them some satisfaction and some meaning to their lives, and that they have their basic needs met, and that within that context, they are able to participate in this larger conversation, interdimensional conversation. And that's not the same story. Like, this would be as opposed to they're going to kill everybody and make everybody puppets and make everybody the same. I think that the interdimensional conversations, the value in terms of complexity and emergence is that there are many different kinds. People who have many different lived experiences, many different, their qualia, their experience of the world is all unique. And I think that in these conversations, there will be technologies that will transcribe those interactions or gather the information, and then it will be integrated into engineered intelligence. The humans do what humans do, which is to go into the field, and then the intelligence systems parse all of the patterns from a vast data lake. And to me, I sort of equate it to lichen. And to me, that feels like a compelling alternative to totalitarianism. Now, a lot of people, their immediate thing is like, you want to state your position on, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Are you saying this is good? Are you saying this is bad? And I'm saying my experience thus far has led me to realize that there's always tremendous information asymmetries, and there's a ton we don't know. And so my current position is simply one of curious observer, to note it and not weigh in with a judgment. Because I think as soon as you start to judge, there is a frequency around that. Like, well, they're this, and then they might do that, and then this bad thing will happen. And I'm not saying this from a judgmental way. I was that person for probably over 10 or 12 years. Like, somebody I love said essentially, like, you have to become a different person or I'm cutting you out of my life. And at the time, it felt like quite outrageous, this request. But in a way, coming out the end, 4 or so years later, I can see that this person was correct. I did actually need to become a different person, but I had to go on this journey, and it wasn't something I could learn from anyone else. I had to do it for myself. And I had to learn to realize that I can engage with information about the current world that seems very overwhelming and very counter to how I understood the world operating, and to introduce profoundly unnerving ideas and concepts that I wasn't prepared and I didn't have an audience to talk to. But rather than, and even when I wasn't over the top angry about it, I think I would hold a frequency of anxiety, even if I wasn't fully aware of it. And then that frequency was affecting the people around me that I very much loved. And we didn't argue verbally, but I think energetically there were bad energy waves coming off of me, because I was essentially unraveling my model of the world as I knew it, as a highly programmed, successful, quote unquote, like smart person, that almost everything that I had learned was either woefully incomplete or totally wrong. And then I was very destabilized, and then I had to start building things back. And the things I'm working with building things back are also highly unnerving, and there's no one to talk to about it. So like, I have compassion for the me that was going through that for 10 years or, now maybe 15 years. Like, I have compassion, because that was not an easy process. And there was not a lot of groups to lean on in that, because I was in a very specific reality tunnel, a very specific story that was unique to my lived experience and what I was experiencing in Philadelphia. That said, ultimately, now coming out the other end, I'm in a much better place energetically. And at the time, I felt like what was being asked of me was to pretend what I knew, that I could forget it, or pretend it didn't happen or it didn't exist. And I'm not that kind of person. So for me, yes, but the 2012 Ewing-Kauffman Ready Nation report that says they're going to securitize Head Start debt attached to Head Start children and trade it on global markets. Like, I could never say, like, I'm just going to pretend I don't know that and put it over here. Because I did know it. But what I've come to realize now is that has not yet happened. That was 2012. It has not yet happened. And so maybe there are many things that we engage with informationally that may never actually come to pass. And we use up a lot of energetic resources worrying about things that aren't actually being realized. And I'm not sure that it will ever be realized in that particular way that I took the report and I extrapolated from that. But that impacted me energetically for a very, very long time. And so I couldn't quite figure out, how do I both acknowledge my brain and the research that I do in knowing these things, and then proceed through it, right? You can't go over, you can't go under, you can't go around, you have to go through. And so the way I've come through it is to realize that I believe a counter narrative to totalitarian puppetry and, the end of the world with nuclear missiles, like whatever the current conflict is that we're going to trot out, a possible narrative that you could consider is one that is aligned with complexity and leotaire and community currencies and interdimensional information exchange, and that in some ways, these are very ancient practices that are being repackaged with a new costume and a new language and a new branding, but it's the same old, very old thing. And that it's based in coherence, and that if you're incoherent, it's not really going to work. And so the system itself has an interest in maintaining coherence among people, to give them basic needs and to give them a story that they like. And within that, going into the field, there are the system of complexity would value diversity, would value like holons, like hundreds and hundreds of holons, and all of the holons would have their own reality tunnel and their own story and their own cohesion. And a lot of times the holons and the reality tunnels would be paired against a counter one. And in the complementary aspects of the different communities and the different stories they engage with, they actually sort of reinforce one another. And in that, I spent some time looking at M.C. Escher, the printmaker, some of his tessellation prints, where he would take white and black figures. There was one in particular, it was a circle, and it was radiating out. They started large, and then they got smaller, of like an abstracted bird. But they were the same shape, but one was white and one was black. And by the contrast of their adjacency, they enhanced one another in some ways. And, I was talking with somebody yesterday about, again, because we don't want to think that there's going to be something bad, right? Like, or that things that are out of alignment with truth or goodness, that there is power in that. And, what I would say is that the relative goodness or badness in a thing really depends on your perspective and the story you inhabit. And, I don't want to make everything super relative. Maybe there are some things that are absolutes, but I would say, for an example, net zero, right? There are many people who are pursuing sustainable development goals around net zero that are regular people that truly believe the story that they are inhabiting, that is a benefit, that is a benefit. Now, they don't know about cybernetics, and they don't know about token systems, and they don't know about global finance derivatives. So the story they're in is a benefit. Now, if you're outside that story and you're looking askance and you're like, but this means that we throw nanotechnology all over everything, and we have dirty energy and satellite surveillance and legalized gambling markets on this debt, and these are all problematic things. It's actually not good. Like, so there's a group that thinks it's good, and then there's a group that thinks it's not good. And by contrast, they sort of reinforce one another. And so I think in some ways, right now, what's going on with the fascism, global fascism, totalitarian, the world is going to hell in a handbasket scheme, is that it's actually going to reinforce the digital commoning and the token engineering and the holons. And essentially through the token engineering, if we understand it as interconnected energy work, kind of the training wheels for telepathy and like beyond verbal and body language communication and that sort of engagement with the field. And so while people might think that they're trading money or doing time banking, they're actually participating in energetic exercises to build up their psi, capacity so they could do their field work, literally field work, later. And this is somewhat speculative on my part, but I feel like as intense as one picture is, the other picture becomes like rises to the occasion. It's like really, really deeply, colored, and then really, really deeply colored the other way. And so you have light and dark, but rather than the Western inclination of framing them as good and evil, like I just feel the yin yang or the complementarity. The world runs on dynamic tension. And, I think for people who imagine at some point there's going to be a place where everything is quote unquote good. Well, that would presume everybody's in the same story. And I don't think that that's ever going to happen. And at that point, it would all, in my opinion, sort of just fits out because there isn't actually a lot of energy behind it to sort of take it to the next emergent phase. And so that's where I am. I've had a lot less of an internet presence the last year or so since I've been undertaking the unwinding of my old life and the ramping up of my new life. And I will just say that I think the resonance matters because again, when I was told that I had to be another person and I couldn't imagine what that new person would be like, that I could be a new person but still have the integrity of me, the old me. How would I do that? And and I'm a planner. And if I had known that, I would want to have a plan or a schedule or something. But, I'm leaning into sort of the unfoldingness of the adventure, right? I keep talking about it as the animist live action role play musical. And so it's happened very naturally. And I have this book by this woman, I think Pippa Una, something like this. And I don't even know how it came to me. It was one of these things, but it was about timeline jumping and essentially sort of engaging with the field, that it's not one big timeline jump, oh, there's a timeline, it's split, we're all split, but more we're jumping timelines with some regularity. And so there were moments over the past year where I engaged in behaviors that the old me probably wouldn't have done. Talk to people I might not have talked to, or gone places I might not normally have gone. And often what I found was very surprising. I would tell myself stories in my head about what I thought might be happening, and then it turns out it wasn't that. Like, and that's why I often say, like, we have incomplete information and we're really good storytellers, and we often tell ourselves stories that like reinforce our current story. But sometimes it's really good just to deconstruct the story, like wholly or in part, and then move forward and see what you can build out of the pieces, because often it's really quite interesting. And so, I'm here in a community of people, like great women, like a sisterhood, people, every time you meet somebody, everybody's a hugger. And it's not an obligatory like pat, like, oh, I have to hug you. No, it's actually like, I want to feel your energy. Like I want to be connected to you, and in a good way, like not a creepy way, a warm, friendly way. And that's just the norm. And we're changing energy all the time. And, we have book groups, and now we have a text list for a lot of people. Well, not a lot of people, but there's some people here who have boats. It's a big thing to go out on Lake Washita, which is this giant lake on a crystal bed, a giant resonator. But for those of us who don't have boats and it's stinking hot here, like we want to get out on the water. So we would just do pop-up swims at different parts of the lake, or different, there's a place called Charlton Recreation Area that's a civilian conservation corps swimming hole from the 30s that's fed by a cold spring, and the water is so cool. And so like we're just building each other up in these very, like tender and sweet ways. And that's a different resonance than the me who is the Philadelphia activist, and very anxious and angry at the world and trying to fix things and not being very successful in fixing things and having my identity wrapped up in that thing. And I'm not saying that was wrong. That was right for me then. But when I'm also talking yin and yang, there's a point at which one contrasts with the other and they give you the balance. The balance is somewhere between the two. And so, now I'm in a place that I'm able to step into a more resonant frequency, for lack of a better term. Like we're here with the crystals and the folks that play the gongs, and we do meditation, and we're in alignment, right? We are an embodied, distributed, collective intelligence, but we don't need tokens. We don't need that part of it. We need us. We need our heart fields, really, and our breath together to do that. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I can't say pretty sure, but in the story that I'm telling for myself, as the contrast to the end times totalitarian story, is that there is some other story over here that's about community networking with psi work in the field, and it's based on a really old ways of being, and that within that context, there's going to be all different versions of how that conversation with the field happens, and they're all going to be unique. And I don't have to judge which is the good one and which is the bad one, because I think they're all going to be able to play out. And at the end of the day, I'm co-creating my own reality, so I'm going to be there creating my own resonance in my own community. And yeah, we don't need to do the token thing, but I also don't need to throw negative energy into those token people, because they're going to do what they're going to do. And if they're in a particular story, there's not a lot that I'm going to be able to say like, no, come to my story. If we're doing cool stuff over here that really resonates, it will resonate in the right people. And that is happening in Hot Springs. There's a lot of people who are coming here now. And so I guess I will just end today by saying, interesting things are still happening in real life, even though I'm not on the internet as much. And one of the real life things that has happened in the last few weeks, there's a Jewish orthopedic psychiatric hospital in Hot Springs called the Levi Hospital. And it's been operating for 111 years. And part of it is that they have a pool that's heated with the thermal waters. The Hot Springs are hot here. It's like 160 degrees. So there's only a few buildings that have the hot water piped into them, the bathhouses and the Arlington Hotel, but one of the other ones is the Levi Hospital. And so, and again, they were doing orthopedic work and psychiatric work, which is super interesting when we think about fashion, microtubules, and interdimensionality. So it's closing its doors abruptly, like in 6 weeks. By August, it'll be closed after 111 years, and it's becoming a community health foundation. So that's a kind of an interesting development. We'll see what happens with that. And the other thing is there's a project here called Vesta House that is a group of investors from New York and California, and they're creating sort of an event space. Vesta is also the equivalent of Hestia, the virgin goddess of the hearth, the keeper of the hearth of Zeus and Hera. And as it turns out, these are some very well-connected folks. And in doing some research on the other projects that they're up to, there's a lot of overlap between other projects that involve collective ritual and other things. They're sort of adjacent to the Long Now Foundation, and also one of the people involved is related to Kevin Kelly of Long Now and Wired Magazine. So I've started making myself, I know it'll be backwards, but this book is called Out of Control by Kevin Kelly, The Rise of Neo-Biological Civilization. So there's your Hiving, and I'm just going to look up the publication date on this, 1994. So what I heard, I guess the story goes, is that the cast of the original Matrix had to read Kevin Kelly's book, Out of Control, before they could crack the script on the Matrix. So yeah, Hiving, right? Hiving, energy, interdimensions. I'm hoping maybe I'll have an inside track on figuring out about the Long Now clock out in West Texas. That would be awesome. And so yeah, we're in the center of a giant resonating crystal bed, and I have an amazing community of super interesting people who all have their own unique abilities and frequencies, and they all like to give hugs and go swimming and just be down to earth. And we're, while people are sort of also meditative-y, there's also a lot of grounded folks, a lot of gardeners, and it's fun. And so I guess what I'm just offering, and I'm not saying you have to do this, and I'm not always good at this. I still get triggered. Like, I think that there are a couple of characters in this live action role play musical that my mind has created to like trigger me, like to every once in a while poke me and be like, did she take the bait on that? And often I do. So then they come back again, in another couple of weeks, and they poke me again, and they're like, is she over that part of herself? And like, I'm getting there. I can laugh about it now. So yeah, like I'm by no means perfect on all of this, but what I'm saying is, if you can inhabit a story that is both true to the reality as you thought you knew it, and push your way through, right? Push your way through and find a new space where you can tell a new imaginary story where the things you knew before are still real, but they're not as much of a threat to you and your beingness as you thought they were. Which is where I've gotten to. Those things are all real. They are all happening at some level to some people. But the model I'm holding of the world is that diversity and coherency and spiritual access and like shared heart space are actually central to what comes next in this, flow state Aquarian age, water bearer thing. And so if that's the case, I'm just going to try to step back and not be in everybody else's business saying they're doing it wrong. Like, there's no satisfaction for me, well, maybe a tiny bit, to be like, oh, Bobby's telling everybody to wear wearables now, right? Or like, Bobby's going to put the migrant kids on blockchain, or Bobby, like, I could go back and just be like, see, I told you so. See, I told you. But like, my record is pretty good. So at this point, I'm probably just making up my own story. So if you're going to make up your own story, make it good. Like, you can make some interesting stuff. Like, it's a live action role play and you don't want it to be boring. Like, there's definitely going to be some drama. I'm not saying like drama isn't like drama, but interesting twists and turns. Like, for me, the Vesta House, like finding out about the Vesta House and their connections to some of the people that I've been researching for a long time within a year of me moving here, that felt like a little hat tip from the universe being like, yeah, we see you. We know you, you're off of the internet, but we'd like to give you something to play with, And so, but have a sense of humor about it. Be able to, it's like the infinite game, James Carse's infinite game, play to keep playing, curious observer, live action role play musical, like, yeah, you could totally like look over the fence at what all the other characters are doing and what the subplots are. Just don't, I would say, try to keep your internal like frequency such that you don't actually get so invested that it throws you off kilter. Because I think, I do worry like how many people have been like, we're supposedly all concerned about chronic illness, but one of the worst things for chronic illness is anxiety. And I've said for a long time, most of the resistance at this point is just about amping up everybody's anxiety, like blowing out your adrenals every day. And like, sure, you could choose that. You could totally choose it, but I'm here to say there are some other choices. And as painful as it was to go through, like, you have to be a different person, I'll say at this point, it was on point. It was actually on point. And I, as a planner, I didn't know how I was going to get there. And so that was part of the process, was just letting go of the plan and seeing what happened next. And what happened next was I got a really good landing place. And I'm not saying this because I want to, I know not everyone has, the opportunities that I have, but I think actually the frequency really makes a difference. Like, I could have made different choices that would have turned out with different outcomes. And so anyway, I guess I've kind of said all of what I have to say, but just food for thought, right? If the idea is that the Aquarian age is about having a conversation with the divine, however you understand that, if you understand it as mathematical fractal, or if you understand it as, crystalline angels, or you understand that as an Abrahamic God, or there are many infinite ways of understanding, like communing with the creative force of the universe outside of like our little corner of it. And if that conversation is about like a new depth, a new level of access, and not just a conversation, but a conversation that creates actionable changes in how we experience reality here, that's only going to go forward if we're coherent. And so the world can't actually end or be a really, really shitty place, and for that to work. And so I think it could be that the totalitarian story is bringing up the other story, and they're defining each other. And we'll see how it goes. So I hope everybody's well, and please don't be too angry with me. It's kind of tender to get out and say like, oh, guess what? I'm still learning. And the me who thought I knew the things back then, it's only layers of the onion, and there's more and more layers. And if we can play it as the infinite game and go like, oh my gosh, really? That, like, there's a new thing, but not in a like, oh, like, just like, oh man, wow, look at that, right? Like, I see what you did there, and do it with sort of a sense of humor, which isn't always my go-to space, but I think we'll get a lot farther, and I think more interesting things will happen in our lives that bring us satisfaction. So anyway, something to think about. And again, if you care, Out of Control by Kevin Kelly, The Rise of Neo-Biological Civilization, because the future of quantum computing looks like a live action role play animist musical. All right. Bye.